This is a very controversial view on veganism that I see nobody really talking about. I think that the biggest proponent of veganism, of the change of our diets, will be economic forces, will be the market, it will be capitalism. Now this goes completely against the thinking that you see online right now on YouTube. You see videos like strategies, post-capitalism, but let me explain here. I know, capitalism hasn't served veganism well in the past. It's one of the main reasons, if not the reason, why living beings get ruthlessly exploited for profits. While Albert Einstein said that we can't solve problems with the same kind of thinking that we use to create them, I think in this case, we actually might be. Today you will learn why a vegan future is actually closer than you might think for 3 reasons that are shockingly new and novel. Okay guys, let's hit it. While it's hard to guess the actual number of veganism globally, the Vegetarianism in America study estimates the percentage in the US to be about 0.5%. However, when it comes to globally, it's a completely different story. See, our population, the human race, is completely unevenly divided on this planet. For example, in India alone, 1.4 billion people live there, which is 18% of the global human population. About 30% of Indians are vegetarians because of ethic, economic, or religious reasons. So let's just, for the sake of simplicity, assume that the global population of vegans is about 1%. It might be more or it might be less. So what does it take to put veganism across the goal line? And where is the goal line in the first place? I estimate the goal line to be about 10% of the global population. Here's why. Number 1, the forgotten story of wool. Wool used to be our fabric of choice when it comes to creating clothes for at least 8 millennia. Yet now most of the fabric our shirts are made are cotton. I think it's a safe guess that what you are wearing right now is cotton too. Why? Because cotton comes from a plant, while wool doesn't. Wool comes from an animal. See, the production of cotton is not easy, but it's way simpler. It doesn't require an animal to be fed, it doesn't require shelter, and it doesn't require as much upkeep. It doesn't have as much overhead as the production of wool. Cotton needs less space, less resources such as food for the sheep, and less workers. Producing cotton is way cheaper and way more profitable, therefore, than producing wool. A producer of cotton will kill the of a producer of wool because they can charge less and sell more of literally the same product. Which means you, as a producer of wool, which comes from an animal, are incentivized to go over to the production of cotton, which comes from a plant. Not because you're a saint, but because there's an economic drive to do so. Because of the market. Because of capitalism. Because producing more clothes in the same amount of time for cheaper prices leads to cash. Number 2, the halal paradox. 5% of the population in the UK is Muslim, yet 51% of the meat, for example lamb, are produced in a halal fashion, which means without stunning for religious practices. First of all, I'm not a huge fan of killing an animal without stunning, but I think the huge discrepancy of the two numbers are really freaking interesting. We might think that while 5% of the UK population is Muslim, 5% of the meat gets produced in a halal fashion. Yet this is not the case. In fact, the meat production outweighs the Muslim population by 10 to 1. Now why is that? Because of economic forces. As a meat producer looking to maximize profits, you're incentivized to sell to a big and broad audience. We essentially have 2 consumers in the UK. Consumer number 1 buys halal and normal meat. Consumer number 2 buys only halal meat. Consumer number 2 is a Muslim. As a producer that wants to appeal to both of those target demographics, you go for the common denominator, which is halal meat. I think it's safe to say that in the next 10 to 20 years, we will see the same thing for fake meat. As the same economic structure that happened to cotton and wool will apply to fake meat. Once fake meat reaches economy of scale, it will soon be cheaper and better tasting than real meat. We will essentially have two global consumers. Consumer number one buys fake meat and real meat. Consumer number two buys only fake meat. As a producer, you're incentivized to go for the common denominator, which is fake meat. Why? Because producing better food for cheaper prices in the same amount of time leads to cash. The best way to predict the future is to look at the past. Yet as Steve Jobs said, you can only connect the dots looking backwards, you cannot connect the dots looking forward. Yet let's just for one moment try to connect the dots looking forward. So let's take a look at where Homo sapiens came from. We originated from the equator, and when we first came to this planet, we shared this beautiful Earth with 5 other human species. A couple dozen years, when our ancestors arrived, when our ancestors evolved, all these other human species were eradicated. Few people know that there was a megafauna in new continents such as Australia. And only a couple centuries after the first humans, Homo sapiens, arrived at that place, they were all dead, hunted to extinction. Only 80 years ago we had no rights for women, and only 60 years ago there were still human zoos in big European cities, displaying people with a different skin color as a species, a foreign species with no rights. Which means Homo sapiens was originally a ruthless and aggressive species once they first came onto this planet. To define our ancestors, as some people might claim, as morally superior to the animal kingdom would simply be extremely false. But, we slowly move into the age of compassion. If you take a look at recent years, you see that circle of compassion is ever expanding. While our compassion was first limited to one gender, of one species, of one ethnicity, we finally spread it to all members of the human species. And it's likely, just if you take a look at the past, that this circle will expand to other species. Which means if you hop on the vegan train or not, it will likely take off with or without you. It would just be cool to claim in hindsight that you were on the right side of history. Conclusion: a vegan future is closer than you might think. A change of the global population of veganism of only 9% would make a gargantuan difference in the way animals are treated globally. I think 10% is the point when veganism has been put across the goal line. And seeing that the biggest milk producer in the US just recently has filed for bankruptcy makes this prediction of a vegan future even more likely. Just as cotton took over wool, fake meat will run over the meat industry with a ruthless power of a bulldozer. That's why we see big meat companies such as Tyson investing in plant-based meat alternatives, not because they suddenly became saints or are considered about the moral or ethical aspect of their production, because they all realize that the product they're selling is becoming obsolete. The mission of this YouTube channel is to put veganism across the goal line. If you want to help us achieve that, like and subscribe to this channel, and don't forget to hit the bell icon. Let's make food production great again.